list to go through all the Psalms, just kind of talk about it very briefly, and yeah, do a little learning. So, why do the nations why do the nations conspire and the people plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up and the rulers band together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, "Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles." The one enthroned in heaven laughs, the Lord scoffs at them. He rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, You are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. Therefore, you kings, be wise. Be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss the Son, or he will be angry, and your way will lead to your destruction. For his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. I always kind of liked the first parts. Here is probably my first part of this psalm. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up together, and rulers band together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles. I think this is really interesting. First of all, the first point, God's sovereignty. Why do the nations conspire and peoples plot in vain? Why are they plotting in vain? What is this really saying? Well, here it says, the one enthroned in heaven laughs and scoffs at them. Why is he laughing? Why would he laugh in that situation? Somebody who's not in control, uh, probably wouldn't be laughing. This is, if you want to put it in silly context, like anime, like the final anime boss is like maniacally laughing because they know they're unbeatable. Of course, I'm not comparing God to that, but like the idea is they're laughing because they're pretty sure that they're gonna win. In that case, they generally don't in that context, but that's the same thing in a different context here. God's laughing as a holy God, by the way. Clarification. Because this has no threats to him whatsoever. And why is that? Because God is in control, obviously, of something. And if he weren't, I don't think there'd be a good reason for him to be laughing. If he didn't have his plans in place, I don't think there'd be any reason to be laughing. Um, so God's sovereignty, right there, good example. And I like these things; they kind of go together. The kings of the earth rise up, right here. Kings of the earth rise up, and the rulers band together against the Lord and His anointed, us Christians, saying, "Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles." What are the chains and the shackles they're talking about? It's interesting there too. The kings of the earth rise up, and the rulers band together against the Lord and against his anointed. So I just think it's interesting because these are the people of the world will without question, without complaint or nuance or any contention whatsoever, will gladly, even if they're enemies, come together. They showed that in the Old Testament with the five kingdoms that came against God. Um, they were separate kingdoms, but they all suddenly were friends as soon as it came to being against God. When God was leading the children of Israel through the wilderness, and they started taking out all these really powerful kingdoms, eventually the people were like, well, we don't want that. So now we have enemy kings suddenly being allies. People of the earth, when it comes to God and His will, even if they're enemies, will gladly band together. You see, it says kings. These are different kingdoms. I don't know if you're aware, but kingdoms do not share the interest of other kingdoms, ever. So it kind of goes to talk about the willingness of humans. Our unredeemed human nature to rise up against the holy God and his anointed. Any essence of God, in other words, anything that would represent God, the people of the world are willing to team up against. Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles. That's a really dramatic sounding. Really sounds dramatic, almost nonsensical, like cartoonishly exaggerated, but it's really not. It is illustrating a point. What are the chains and what are the shackles? Moralism? Not moralism in the sense of like strict moralism apart from God, because that's a totally different thing actually. But you know, expectations of God, doing the right thing. This reflects human depravity. Why would the only way we would ever consider anything that the Lord has to be chains and shackles? The only thing that would ever consider that would be something evil, because God is 100% good, right? That's what makes God God, and that's what makes the devil the devil. The devil is not good, God is. So for us to start saying that anything that God has is chains or shackles means that the state that we are in is not holy, because a holy person or entity would never consider another holy thing to be a chain or shackle. In other words, those are burdens. Those are undesirable, and typically very negatively a very negative connotation, obviously, for pretty obvious reasons. There's a lot being said here. God's in control. People will band together, even if they serve different kingdoms with different motives, and they will do it without question, to not have to, because just about anything to a worldly person, just about anything is better than having to live for the Lord and to do his will. And that should say a lot about how much we need God. And despite that, God says that he's laughing about it. He's laughing about it. He's not worried about it. He's not concerned. He said, go ahead, have all the kings you want. Because just like when the children of Israel went through the land and they got all their kings together, it won't matter. It won't work. God's will be done on the earth. In other words, it's not gonna matter. And to go even further, then, he rebukes and terrifies them and talks about what he's done. Instead, where people are so focused on what they're doing, God's like, that's nice, but this is what I have done. And in other words, he's saying this takes precedence over this. So I'm laughing because this is so much more than this. So Jesus is the king on Zion, the holy mountain. Anyway, Psalms 2, good psalm. Won't go too crazy with it. Hope you enjoyed that little bit. That was nice, fun. Let's play some games.